So, if you saw my last video, you know that I was going back in time and looking at some of the best players in the league and who they were compared to at the time they were drafted. The theme of it all, though, was that they all proved to be much better than the players that they were compared to. For today's video, as was highly requested, we're going to be following a similar concept, once again going back and looking at draft day comparisons of players, except this time we will be focusing on those that were compared to some pretty great players, but then failed to become anywhere near as good. Before we start though, make sure to subscribe to the channel, as all support is very much appreciated. Now, with that being said, let's begin. Up first, let's go back in time to the 2010 draft and take a look at Evan Turner. Turner played 3 years in college, improving immensely each year, and by the third year, he had become dominant in the college game, winning Player of the Year that year. His game was very well-rounded offensively, averaging 20 points, 9 rebounds, and 6 assists per game at Ohio State that year, and numbers like those will pop out for any NBA scout. He was legitimately in contention for the #1 pick that year, but Washington Wizards ultimately went with John Wall instead, and rightfully so he slid to the second pick by the Philadelphia 76ers. The Sixers at the time thought they were getting a great wing option, as his pre-draft comparison was to Brandon Roy, who, for any of you younger fans who may be watching this video, was cold in his prime. From 2008 to 2010, Roy was legitimately one of the best shooting guards in the whole league, and was also a super fun to watch player as well. Unfortunately, injuries cut his career short super early on, but those 3 years were great. Turner, however, was not the next Brandon Roy, or even anything close to it. In the NBA, he's been one of the least efficient wing players in the league, consistently posting true shooting percentages below 50% or barely above there. His defense leaves much to be desired, and he's usually more of a negative than a positive for teams. For someone with so much promise coming into the league, Turner's career has been far from what many thought it would be. Next up on this list is Marcus Smart. Smart is a big-bodied guard who locks up the opposition on defense. Ever since his college days at Oklahoma State, he's been known more for his defense than his offense. He's been a bit of a tweener position-wise as well, capable of playing both point guard and shooting guard, but scoring the ball efficiently has never been a strong suit of his. Now, brace yourselves for this comparison that was made for him when he got drafted, because it threw me through a loop as well when I heard it, but his draft day comparison was to none other than all-time great shooting guard Dwayne Wade. I don't need to get into what makes Wade so great, because that should be pretty self-explanatory, but the thing that's so tough about this is that Smart never really played like Wade at all. Sure, neither really liked to shoot threes on offense, but the rest of Wade's offensive game was so polished and advanced, and Smart has legitimately struggled on offense for years. They're both great defensive players, which is fair, but overall this comparison is just so off, and leaves me questioning what they were thinking back in 2014. Up next, let's take a look at Jeremy Lamb, who was a lottery pick back in 2012. Lamb was a teammate of Kemba Walker at UConn when they won the national championship in 2011, and was a valuable contributor on the wing. He had good size for a shooting guard, good length, and his shooting was supposed to be his biggest and most translatable strength to the NBA. Because of this, his comparison was very ambitious, being compared to one of the greatest shooters of all time, Reggie Miller. What made Reggie so good was his off-the-ball movement, constantly running around with screens and cutting to try to get an open look, and his three-point shot was lethal. He was a 5-time All-Star, led his Pacers to the finals in 2000, and is in the Hall of Fame. Meanwhile, this is currently Lamb's 7th season, and he is just now becoming an above-average role player, averaging 15 points per game. His shooting in the NBA has not lived up to the hype at all, being a below-average 33% shooter, and he certainly hasn't shown anything that makes you think he could be one day as a go-to option. This comparison was definitely bold at the time, and has proven now to be way off. Up next, let's look at Kendall Marshall, who is actually completely out of the league today. Back in college though, he was one of the best playmakers in the entire country, dishing out assists at an absurdly high rate for North Carolina. In both of his seasons, he averaged either as many or more assists than he scored points, which was both impressive and worrisome. Because of his playmaking ability, he too was taken in the lottery of 2012 by the Phoenix Suns, and his draft day comparison was to former All-Star and Warriors coach Mark Jackson. On paper, this comparison makes a lot of sense, because Jackson was a phenomenal passer back in his day, having led the league in assists in the 1997 season and consistently being near the top year after year. Jackson didn't shoot much from the outside, like Marshall, but the reason why Jackson had such a long and successful career was because he was at least serviceable on the offensive end and was a pretty good defender. Marshall, however, continued to flash the ability to create for others in the NBA, but was legitimately not very good at anything else. He played on a bunch of bad teams, including the 2013 Suns, the 2014 Lakers, and the 2016 Sixers, and never made much of an impact. Because of that, he hasn't been in the league since 2016, and the comparison to Mark Jackson is not looking very good. Next, let's shift our focus over to Cody Zeller. Zeller comes from a big basketball family, having two other brothers that also made it to the NBA, and Cody was supposed to be the best of the three of them. He was an All-American at Indiana and looked primed to become the next big man that thrives in the post with crafty moves and a reliable mid-range game. He went on to be picked 4th overall in 2013 by the Charlotte Hornets, who thought they were getting the next LaMarcus Aldridge, who was the player Zeller was compared to at the time of the draft. Aldridge has been one of the best power forwards in the league for about 10 years now, being a 7-time All-Star. Aldridge makes his money with his face-up game, his lethal mid-range game, and crafty post moves, his ability to haul in rebounds, as well as being able to hold his own defensively in the paint. Now, Zeller has by no means been bad throughout his career, but after once being thought of as someone with all-star potential, Zeller has settled into a role with the Hornets where he sets hard screens and gets most of his looks within the flow of the offense, rarely getting his name called, which is perfectly okay. He's a reliable role player, which is well below LaMarcus Aldridge's output, but I guess it would be fair to say that he became a poor man's LaMarcus Aldridge. Up next, let's take a look at Ben Mclemore at the time of the draft, who had a ton of hype. He was a one-and-done out of Kansas back in 2013, which was pretty wide open at the top. None of the prospects that year necessarily stuck out as the best in the class, which is part of the reason why Anthony Bennett wound up being picked first that year. But Mclemore was pretty intriguing. He had an okay year at Kansas, but there was talk about him being potentially great, and by great, I mean Ray Allen great, because Ray Allen was the player he was compared to at the time of the draft. He was the same height as Ray Allen, had similar measurables, and even his shooting form was similar, so of course people started to hype him up as the next Ray Allen. Unfortunately, he went to the Kings, and with their luck, he has been pretty close to a bust so far. They gave him every opportunity to produce early on, letting him start for the first 3 years, but he was just never able to make much of an impact. He's now completely out of the league, and if he's signed at any point this year or next year, it might just be his last chance. The last player we'll discuss in this video put on a show in March Madness and almost led his Michigan Wolverines to a national title, but ultimately lost in the championship game, and that player is Trey Burke. Hitting countless tough shots, showing off fearless aggressiveness, and possessing a terrific motor, Burke overcame a lot on his way to becoming a lottery pick, having not been a very sought-after recruit. He was drafted 9th overall in 2013 by the Utah Jazz, and the players he was compared to were both Kemba Walker and Kyle Lowry, who are both undersized guards like Burke, but have also gone on to become multiple-time All-Stars in their careers. Kemba's one of the best scoring guards in the league, capable of taking anyone off the dribble and creating an open look for himself with his plethora of moves. And Lowry is just a steady, do-it-all point guard who runs the offense at a high rate, knocks down threes, and plays hard-nosed defense. Burke was expected to become some sort of mix between the two, yet in reality fell way short of both of them. He struggled with efficiency his entire career, and unlike Lowry, his defense has not translated because of his height. He briefly looked like he was primed to turn his career around last year, but at this point I think it's safe to say the best thing he'll ever be is a backup. And with that being said, that's all I have for you today. Make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel, and follow me on Twitter at hoopsreference. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.